3.3 Taking Up Arms, Part 1. The calm between the colonies and England did not last long. Economic and political disputes continued, this time over a simple drink. Tea was tremendously popular in the colonies. By 1770, at least 1 million Americans brewed tea twice a day. People would rather go without their dinners than without a dish of tea, a visitor to the colonies noted. Boston Tea Party. Mercantilist policies lead to the Tea Act. Since 1720, Parliament had given the British East India Company exclusive rights to sell tea to the American colonies. Parliament protected this by mandating that tea sold to the colonies had to be shipped to England first, so taxes could be paid. Then the tea was shipped to colonial tea merchants for sale in the American colonies. This system met resistance due to the taxation of tea in the American colonies. Remember, to maintain its authority over the colonies, Parliament had kept a tax on tea when repealing the Townshend Acts. The tax was a small one, but colonists resented it. As a result, many colonists refused to buy British tea. Also, the colonists were able to get cheaper tea directly from Dutch and French traders, who smuggled it to American merchants. In the 1770s, the British East India Company found itself in deep financial trouble, due in part to dwindling tea sales in the American colonies. As a result, more than 15 million pounds of tea sat unsold in British warehouses. Parliament tried to help the British East India Company by passing the Tea Act of 1773. The act let the company bypass colonial tea merchants and sell directly to colonists. The Tea Act also gave the British East India Company a rebate on tea taxes. Although colonists would still have to pay the tea tax, they would not have to pay a higher price charged by colonial tea merchants. As a result, the tea itself would cost less than ever before. Parliament hoped this would encourage Americans to buy more British tea. To the surprise of Parliament, colonists protested the Tea Act. Many colonists were opposed to British mercantilist policies that were supposed to generate wealth for England by taxing the colonies. In other words, England was profiting from this, not American merchants. However, American tea merchants were especially angry because they had been cut out of the tea trade. They believed that allowing the government-sponsored British East India Company to sell Americans violated their right to conduct free enterprise. Even tea drinkers who would have benefited from the law scorned the Tea Act. They believed it was British trick to make them accept Parliament's right to tax the colonies. A boycott against tea. Once again, colonists responded to the new law with a boycott. A Philadelphia poet, Hannah Griffiths, urged American women to stand firmly resolved and bid Grenville to see that rather than freedom, we part with our tea. And, well, as we love the dear drink when a dry, as American patriots, our taste we deny. Daughters of Liberty and women like Griffiths led the boycott. They served coffee or made Liberty tea from raspberry leaves. At some ports, Sons of Liberty enforced the boycott by keeping the British East India Company from unloading cargoes of tea. An act of civil disobedience. 3 ships loaded with tea reached Boston Harbor in late November 1773. The colonial governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, insisted that they unload their cargo as usual. Sam Adams and the Sons of Liberty had other plans. On the night of December 16th, they met in Old South Meeting House. They sent a message to the governor demanding the ships leave the harbor, so they gave the governor a warning shot. When the governor rejected the demand, Adams stood up and declared, This meeting can do nothing further to save the country. Adams' words seemed to be a signal. As if on cue, a group of men in Indian disguises burst into the meeting house. From the gallery above, voices cried, "Boston Harbor a teapot tonight. The Mohawks are come." The disguised colonists left the meeting house and headed for the harbor. Others joined them along the way. Under a nearly full moon, the men boarded the ships, split open the tea chest, and dumped the tea into the harbor. By 10 p.m., the Boston Tea Party, as it was later called, was over. The contest of 342 chests of tea floated in the Boston harbor. The next day, John Adams wrote about the event in his diary. The destruction of the tea is so bold, so daring, so firm. It must have such an important and lasting results that I can't help considering it a turning point in history. Wow, was he right. The Boston Tea Party was an important act of civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is the nonviolent refusal to obey laws that one considers unjust. The colonists had many reasons for this act of civil disobedience. They wanted to voice their discontent to the British without hurting anyone. They also wanted to stop the tea from entering Boston. The impact of their civil disobedience was perhaps greater than they expected. Harsh punishment would come from Britain. King George III strikes back at Boston. Colonists had mixed reactions to the Boston Tea Party. Some cheered it as a firm protest against unfair British laws. Others worried it would encourage lawlessness in the colonies. Even those who condemned the Boston Tea Party, though, were shocked at British harsh response to it. The unrest in Boston and the British reaction to the Tea Party would be yet another cause of the Revolution. The intolerable acts anger Massachusetts. The British were outraged by what they saw as Boston's lawless behavior. In 1774, Parliament, encouraged by King George III, acted to punish Massachusetts. Colonists called the 4 laws they passed the intolerable acts because they were so harsh. These acts pushed the colonists closer to revolution. First, Parliament shut down the port of Boston. No ship could enter or leave the harbor, not even a small boat. The harbor would remain closed until the colonists paid for the tea they had destroyed in the Boston Tea Party and repaid British officials, such as Thomas Hutchinson, for damage to personal property. Boston's harbor was central to the life of the city. With the closing of the port, merchants could not sell their goods, and the colony's economy suffered. Second, Parliament forbade Massachusetts colonists to hold town meetings more than once a year without the governor's permission. In the past, colonists had called town meetings whenever they wished. Public officials would now be selected by the king's governor rather than be elected by citizens. Third, Parliament allowed customs officers and other officials who might be charged with major crimes to be tried in Britain or Canada instead of Massachusetts. Colonists protested. They argued that a dishonest official could break the law in the colonies and avoid punishment by being tried before a sympathetic jury. Fourth, Parliament passed a new quartering act. No longer would redcoats camp in tents in the Boston Common. Instead, colonists would have to house British soldiers in their homes when no other housing was available. Colonists viewed this act as yet another tax because they had to house and feed the soldiers. Many objected to having the British Army stationed in the colonies at all. We're going to skip this part about the Quebec Act. And the intolerable acts draw other colonies into the struggle. The committees of correspondence spread news of the intolerable acts to other colonies. They warned that the people of Boston faced hunger while their port was closed. People from other colonies responded quickly. Carts rolled into the city with rice from South Carolina, corn from Virginia, and flour from Pennsylvania. In the Virginia Assembly, Thomas Jefferson suggested that a day be set aside to mark the shame of the intolerable acts. The royal governor of Virginia rejected the idea. The colonists went ahead anyway. On June 1st, 1774, church bells tolled slowly. Merchants closed their shops. Many colonists prayed and fasted all day. In September 1774, colonial leaders called a meeting in Philadelphia. Delegates from 12 colonies gathered in what became known as the First Continental Congress. A congress is just a group of people. Only Georgia did not send delegates. Georgia on the time was on a side quest. After much debate, the delegates passed a resolution backing Massachusetts in its struggle. They agreed to boycott all British goods and to stop exporting goods to Britain until the Intolerable Acts were repealed. The delegates also urged each colony to set up and train its own militia. A militia is an army of citizens who serve as soldiers during an emergency. Before leaving Philadelphia, the delegates agreed to meet again in May 1775. Little did they suspect that before then, an incident in Massachusetts would change the fate of the colonies forever. At this time, you will complete the questions for Part 1 of Lesson 3.3. You do not need to worry about using complete sentences. Please answer the questions best you can, and please turn them in today.